everyone. It's Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, and I'm so pleased to join you at the National Immigrant Integration Conference. I want to thank all of you for the critical work you do in advancing the rights of immigrants, asylum seekers, and refugees, and for championing the integration of immigrants into our national community. That work has been especially crucial during these very difficult times. Immigrant communities who were already targeted by the vindictive policies of the Trump administration have felt the outsized impact of the pandemic, the economic crisis, and our national reckoning with racism. And your support has been more needed than ever. Now, as we welcome the Biden administration and our nation moves forward on a new path, it is so important that we not only right the wrongs of the past, but create a more just society. We must center equity and inclusion in our recovery plans, our immigration policies, and our vision for the future. I promise to keep fighting for a more equitable future in Washington as hard as you do in your communities. Thank you again for all of the important work you do, and enjoy your conference.
To make use of water. Dilute. I forget the Arabic word for economy. I forget the English word for asal. Forget the Arabic word for incense and English word for miskin. Arabic word for sandwich. English for saydaliya and mat'am and wallahi and safia. Stupid girl. Atlantic got your tongue. Blur. Back home we are plagued by a politeness so dense, even the doctors cannot call things what they are. My grandfather's left eye, swirled thick with smoke, what my new mouth can call glaucoma, while the Arabic still translates to the white water. Swim. I want to go home. Dissolve. I want to go home. Drown. Half don't even make it out or across. You get to be ungrateful. You get to be homesick from safe inside your blue American passport. Do you even understand what was lost to bring you here?
MIPEX is the Migration Policy Index, and today we honor the 2020 release of MIPEX as an international study looking at all that's going on around the world among 52 countries. And we have an opportunity for us to explore how the United States and Canada particularly relate to each other in the world of immigrant integration and learn from each other. So today with me to help us understand this all the way from Brussels, Thomas Huddleston. Thomas, thank you for joining us, the architect in many ways and coordinator of MIPEX International, so critical voice that we'll be going to in moments. Maurice Belanger, an old friend from days when he was with the National Immigration Forum and has since been a consultant working with many of us in many different roles as a great researcher and understander of all things immigration in the United States. Thank you, Maurice, for being with us. Marisha Akbar from Toronto, who has been taking a hard look at the issues of how labor is changing in Canada and how dependent Canada is on immigrants, and has also been key to helping Canada participate in MIPEX. Usha George, who's the director and researcher at the Migration and Integration Study Center at Ryerson College, a terrific scholar in the area. We've got a wonderful voice from Oregon. Kayse Jama is with us, and Kayse's been a powerful voice to ask the right questions at the right time about how we deal with the intersectionality of race. And we also have with us Ava Millona, who has distinguished herself as the creator of the National Partnership for New Americans and has done a great job with the Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition. A terrific group, and we're delighted to share them with you today. Immigrant integration is not easily understood. You know, when you think about it, we've oversimplified it and we've often confused it with just being tolerant or allowing people in, or hoping that immigrants can get jobs and not take jobs away. It's a very simple view of this, but in reality, we need to understand that we have to think about into what we are integrating people. Are we integrating people into the United States or into Canada? Or are we integrating people into New England or into New York? Are we integrating people into the white culture or the black culture? Are we integrating people into a multicultural society or an assimilationist culture? There are tremendous differences. So we should know what integration is. It is not the simple definitions that you've read in the past of assimilation. It is not what it means for us to do acculturation, where you go home to your own culture and put up with each other in the daytime. It is a much more profound view of reaching policies that allow us to respect all people with policies that protect and give opportunity to all people. And we want to talk about that today. Now, the shadow of our earliest colonies still exists across all of our work. And we need to understand that this election will not be the only cure for the things that have boded ill for us. One of the things that is amazing is that, when New France settled in the early days of 1600s, before the Plymouth colony, they married the Indian women and they set up a new federation. We also have seen that New Yorkers had terrific diversity, with a Muslim owning a farm just beyond Wall Street and 18 languages being spoken in 1648 among 500 people in the city proper at that time, the colony proper. The Padres who came up from Mexico set up a patron society that held all kinds of people, including the Indians, oppressed, let alone what happened to the American slave story. The ideas of liberty, of equality, of opportunity are not given in an equal measure across our countries, nor are they understood in the same way. The same words mean different things in different societies, different cities, different states. So we have an opportunity using MIPEX to really rethink this and to look at 168 different measures to ask whether or not we are achieving the things that we want. If you think about these 8 large profile areas, they represent for us another way of seeing ourselves and being able to come together and create new policies with new opportunities for all. Take a good hard look. And the person to do that for us at the outset and to understand these policy areas and how we can interpret them and put them into practice for ourselves is Thomas Huddleston from Belgium. Welcome, Thomas.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us to get to see how both the United States and Canada can be more ambitious in their integration policies by looking for international experiences and getting more realistic expectations for what they can achieve through their policies. I'm here with the Migration Policy Group, working for 25 years to compare and improve integration, anti-discrimination policies in Europe and around the world. And the Migrant Integration Policy Index is all available here at your fingertips at mipex.eu. The MIPEX is the most comprehensive tool that we have to compare these policies around the world in terms of the number of policy indicators that it uses to see which policies are present or absent. In terms of its methodology, working with national experts like those we have in the US and Canada, and then being checked centrally by the Migration Policy Group. It covers 2007 to 2019 in 8 areas that are essential for immigrants' participation in public life that we're going to get to later. And it now covers 52 countries in Europe, North America, Latin America, East Asia, and Oceania. The MIPEX is comprehensive, but its main value is how useful it can be for helping people to get an international perspective on their work, and also to put forward the issues that they are seeing from the ground, and they want more attention given to that. So it's used a lot by policymakers trying to improve their policies, by NGOs who are looking for evidence to substantiate their arguments, by media who are trying to compare, and by researchers. Most recently, the MIPEX figured into the draft Global Compact on Migration at the UN, calling for all states to participate in MIPEX in order to identify challenges and best practices. So MIPEX looks at 8 areas of life and the obstacles and opportunities created by policies. You can learn more about all of this at the MIPEX Key Findings section. And you can look in all of the different policy areas, but we at our team have also looked across all these policy areas. And we were able to see, actually, what are the 3 underlying dimensions in how countries approach integration that you find across the 3 different areas that I want to talk about first. So these three dimensions are basic rights. So do immigrants have the same basic rights regardless of their status? Secondly, equal opportunities. Do governments actually support equal opportunities so that immigrants can be participating as much in society as non-immigrants? And thirdly, long-term security. Do immigrants have a secure future in the country, just like national citizens do? Can they really build their lives here by investing to settle permanently in the country? So now, based on these three dimensions, we classify countries in terms of their approach to integration. We have our top 10 out of the 52 countries. Well, these are countries whose policies tend to offer immigrants equal rights, equal opportunities, and equal security. Just below the top 10, we have other countries who are also offering an approach of comprehensive integration, offering most rights, opportunities, and security in most of the areas that MIPEX looks at. But then just below them, we have countries that are really only offering temporary integration, meaning that immigrants might enjoy equal rights and equal opportunities, but they don't have that long-term security that they would need to be able to settle permanently in the country. We also have countries that take a different approach. They might offer immigrants basic equal rights and some long-term security in the country, but they're really ignoring the specific needs that immigrants have, and they're not investing in equal opportunities. Instead, they're only offering equality on paper. And the last category that we have in MIPEX is what we call immigration without integration. Countries that might let immigrants settle long-term, but don't let them participate with equal rights and equal opportunities. So I'm going to show you the MIPEX rankings with the different international results today. But I also will talk to you about why these integration policies matter, because MIPEX is being extensively used by researchers doing complex multivariate statistical analysis that allows us to see whether integration policies are promoting the kinds of outcomes that we want to see in society. How much do integration policies really matter as a factor? We found 130 peer-reviewed scientific studies that link MIPEX to integration outcomes for immigrants and for the public. So we have 5 overall approaches to integration policy, and not all countries are the same. We have some countries that have one approach but are very strong, or one approach that are very weak. What you'll find most interesting here are who are our international top 10, the countries that tend to be offering equal rights, opportunities, and security to immigrants. And you see that includes Canada, the United States, Brazil, Australia, New Zealand, Sweden, Finland, Ireland, Portugal, and Belgium. But there's a story that's deeper here that we want to get into, because there's actually some major differences between these top 10 countries. So here I'm showing you the differences on the different MIPEX 8 policy areas, where we're looking at how supportive policies are in these different areas of life. And you see that there are actually some differences between Canada and the United States. So overall, what's happened is Canada has gone up in the MIPEX since 2014. Now Canada overall gets an 80 out of 100, which in MIPEX is really significant, because that means that now its policies are considered to be favorable for social integration. It's just the start. Canada still has a way to go, but it is rising, and it is actually among the top 4 of all MIPEX countries. Whereas the United States only scores 73 out of 100. And actually, it's fallen in the top 10. It actually had risen 3 points until 2016, when we also had a change of administration. And since there, actually, the United States has fallen 2 points. So now overall, it's gone down to 73. And what's really relevant here is that the gap between the United States and Canada has grown. So the United States used to be just 3 points behind Canada and other leading countries, but now it has fallen as a global leader. And you can see the areas of strength and weakness that we see in Canada, and we'll talk more about later. You can see that one of the big weaknesses in both the Canadian and the US approach is encouraging the political participation of foreign citizens, those who don't become citizens. We also see that there are some important gaps in the family reunification and permanent residence policies in the United States and Canada that can be weaknesses for integration. We also see some weaknesses here in terms of the support for migrant health policy, both in Canada and the United States. So Canada and the United States offer good practices for the rest of the world, but the rest of the world also offers many good practices for both the United States and Canada. Here I show you the 4 countries that scored alongside or actually higher than Canada in the 8 areas. And you can see which countries you could definitely learn from, countries that have more flexible and realistic policies on family reunification or the path to permanent residence. Countries that have really an inclusive approach to democracy and make sure that all citizens, national citizens or foreign citizens, are informed, consulted, and supported to get involved in local civil society and in politics. And countries that have a more comprehensive approach to health to make sure that healthcare provisions are fully inclusive and that healthcare services are responsive and accessible to all people. You can also look and see what role cities can play in supporting national integration policies. And if you're interested in this, I'd recommend that you look into the work of the Intercultural Cities Index that's complementary to MIPEX. And here I show you just the top 10 biggest cities of immigration in Europe that have an inclusive intercultural approach to integration. Now, you might ask me, well, if a country is supporting integration because it's put in place ambitious support and offers a lot of targeted measures and guarantees equal rights and facilitates residence, well, why does that really matter? And I've often heard people say, yes, well, on the books, I see one thing, but in practice, I see another. Well, that's because in your countries, like say in Canada, that's because you're invested so much in integration and you're really actively trying to support this process. And what you're not seeing, because you're not comparing yourself to the rest of the world, is actually that you are closing some of those gaps. You are actually raising some of those levels of participation. And you're not just affecting immigrants, you're also affecting the public. So I wanted to take my last moments to give you some of this MIPEX evidence showing why integration policies matter for integration, because our policies structure how it works as a two-way process. First of all, our integration policies are actually a key for public welcome, because the way that governments treat immigrants send very strong messages to the public about whether or not they should see immigrants as their equals, as their neighbors, and as their fellow citizens. So here you can see how well a country does on MIPEX on that x-axis, and you can see on the y-axis a global Gallup poll that they use to measure how accepting the public is of immigrants all around the different MIPEX countries. And here you can see that strong correlation showing that countries with more inclusive policies on MIPEX actually have publics that see immigrants as equals, as neighbors, and as citizens. Now, what we see is this is really operating in a dynamic, right? So when you have positive, inclusive policies, there's pressure on politicians to be inclusive. We get a virtuous cycle where more inclusive policies helps the public to also become more inclusive. But when you start to have a turn and you have politicians who start to talk about immigrants not as opportunities, but as threats, over time, what we see is you can end up in a vicious cycle where restrictive discourse leads to restrictive policies, and that can have an impact on public opinion. So countries that have more inclusive policies on MIPEX, they actually have lower levels of the public thinking that immigrants are a threat, lower levels of xenophobia, of Islamophobia, they have higher levels of social trust, and higher levels of public interaction with immigrants. But as I said, it also matters.
That's really good, Thomas. Do you have a closing sentence before we turn this over to our national voices?
Yes, sure. I just wanted to end by showing about why it matters as part of a two-way process, because actually integration policies are also really key to immigrants' happiness. The countries with really inclusive policies on MIPEX, as you can see here, using the Global Happiness Index, actually end up with immigrants who have higher levels of life satisfaction. greater sense of identity and belonging to the country, greater pride, a greater social trust, greater voting, greater participation in politics in both conventional and unconventional ways, greater awareness of discrimination, greater reporting of discrimination, and they even have better health outcomes in whatever way you measure it. So I really hope we think about how we can improve our policies, because international evidence shows that these investments are going to make integration work better for immigrants and for the public.
Well, that's a rich introduction for everyone who doesn't know MIPEX about all that's measured and all that is available for us to do comparatively. To take a look at the comparative nature of this is to look at the United States and Canada today. So our two experts, Maurice Bellanger and Marisha Akbar, are going to each take some minutes to share with us some highlights of what they see about their country in MIPEX, so that we can learn from each other how these differences have evolved and what it means for us to have different results in the scales. Maurice.
Thank you. I'm going to turn on my slides now. So what I'm going to do over the next several minutes is look at the U.S. scores. Just a quick look at how we compare to the average of the other MIPEX countries and what has changed since 2014. We'll look at where we are strongest and where we are weak, where we have a lower score. We're going to look at a new concern for us, which is the public charge rule, which has caused us to drop in the overall score, as Thomas mentioned. I also want to take a minute to talk about how can we have this high score on immigrant integration in the context of the policy environment that we've been in under the Trump administration. And related to that are ongoing policy turbulence, which is going to cause a lot of churn in our immigration policies over the next several years. And then finally, just conclude with talking about the value of MIPEX and how we can use it in our work. So here is our score. As you can see, we do quite well against the average of the MIPEX, the 50 other countries that are in it. And we're pretty much the same as the 2014 scores, but we have fallen a bit. And here are our scores comparing with 2014 on the various policy strands. And you can see in the permanent residence strand and the family reunification strand is where we have fallen the most. Just taking a look at where we are strongest, which is our anti-discrimination policies. And that's because of the Constitution, the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, the Civil Rights Act of 1957 and 1964, which prohibit discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, and national origin, and now sexual orientation as well, in schools, public accommodations, employment, etc. The Immigration and Nationality Act prohibits immigration-related employment discrimination. We have a number of enforcement entities. There's the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division, the Immigrant and Employee Rights section of the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division, which enforces laws protecting against immigration-related employment discrimination. We have the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. These were both established by the Civil Rights Act. And other federal agencies have their own offices to enforce anti-discrimination laws. For example, within the Department of Education, there is an office on civil rights. Also, states and localities may have their own anti-discrimination laws and their own enforcement entities. We're weakest in political participation, and that is in part because there's no right to vote for foreign nationals who are not citizens. There are some exceptions in some local areas which allow non-citizens to vote in local elections. For example, where I live in Tacoma Park, Maryland, we allow non-citizens to vote in our local elections. There's no another indicator in the MIPEX scoring. We have no formal policy consultation with foreign residents or groups representing foreign residents, sort of at the national government level. Under the Obama administration, there was the Task Force on New Americans, which played that role somewhat. So the issue of concern, which has caused us to drop, is the public charge rule, which has caused a problem with the ability of people to come here on family visas and to gain permanent residence. And you can see that the impact on of these lowered scores on our overall score comparing to Canada. Actually, I'm going to skip this one. I wanted to talk a little bit about, let me go back to the public charge rule, because here's the impact of it. First of all, it applies to prospective immigrants, and what it's doing is the government is saying, will this person be likely to use public benefits? And the definition of public benefits has been expanded to be a range of public benefits that might include, for example, food stamps. The Migration Policy Institute took a look at this and estimated that 69% of current green card recipients have at least one characteristic that would put them at risk of having their green card denied on public charge grounds. It also applies to people who are already here in one immigration status and want to change to another immigration status. For example, someone who might be here under temporary protected status. We have many thousands of people who are here who are not sending back because of natural disasters or political violence in their countries. If they, for example, get married to a U.S. citizen and become eligible for a green card, they could be denied with this new rule. Another estimate, looking at it differently, puts the decline in visas for immediate relatives of U.S. citizens, that is, spouses, minor children, parents. There would be a decline in those visas of perhaps 200,000 a year. But still, we have a high score. We're in the top 10, as Thomas indicated earlier, and that seems odd given the policy environment that we've been in under the Trump administration, and that's partly because we're looking at immigrants, people who are here in the United States who are here on green cards, and how are we doing integrating them? The Trump administration has been focusing more on people who are coming across the border seeking asylum, undocumented immigrants who are here, and what a lot of press attention has focused on is the wall. the family separation policy. This policy called metering, where asylum seekers coming across the border, showing up at ports of entry, only a few of them per day or over a short period of time are allowed to apply for asylum, and then the rest have to wait. Then there's the stuck in Mexico policy, which where now asylum seekers are forced to wait in Mexico after they've applied for asylum. They're forced to wait in Mexico while their cases are being heard in the United States or moving through the courts in the United States. So we're in the middle of a lot of policy turbulence. Even since the Trump administration came to power, there have been almost 1,000 policy changes in the immigration arena. And that includes executive orders, it includes regulations, it includes changes to the manuals that adjudicators use. It includes the foreign affairs manual that consular officers use abroad. And even since the MIPEX scores were done at the end of last year, there have been hundreds of changes, and there are still dozens more regulations being written. Hopefully, those will not see the light of day. And now we have a new administration coming to power, and we are likely to see. We definitely will see a lot more policy changes. These will be changes to our liking. So I just want to say a few points, make a few points about the limitations and the value of MIPEX. What we are not measuring is, or at least in our U.S. scores, we haven't really talked about the integration of long resident unauthorized immigrants. Most unauthorized immigrants here have been living here for 10, 15, 20 and more years. We really need to see these integrated like other long resident immigrants. It also doesn't capture the diversity of policies of state and local governments. And in a country the size of the United States, where many of our states are the size of European countries, that really matters. Another point I wanted to make is that maybe not all our low scores warrant improvement. For example, in the political participation strand, there is we have no voting for non-citizens. In our case, I think it would be, it's much more worth the energy spent on going after the immigrants who are eligible to become citizens but are not citizens. There are millions of those. We should try to make those people citizens to try to change policy so that non-citizens can vote in this country. There would be a major backlash against that.
That's a great point to thank you, Maurice, because I think you really nailed the issue of citizenship, which is radically different in Canada. And so with a thank you to you, let me throw this over to your colleague and ask Marisha to jump in and share with us the highlights of what they saw in Canada and help us to draw some comparisons. Hi, Marisha. Marisha Akbar.
Hello, let me share my screen first. First, I would like to thank Westy and the USA and Canada team for organizing this interesting and informative session. The aim of my presentation today is to evaluate Canadian policies and understand how Canada is performing in terms of immigrant integration and settlement, as well as to understand the strengths and weaknesses of Canadian policies in relation to the USA. So, as Thomas already mentioned, with 80 points, Canada has secured its position in the top 4 MIPEX list of the countries, and it got much higher points compared to the average MIPEX score for 52 countries, as well as 7 points higher than USA. So between 2014 and 2019, Canada actually added 2 points, while USA lost 2 points. So that is why 2019 is kind of an important year to reflect on the policy changes and what is happening in different policy areas. So this chart shows the highest to lowest scores for Canada in 8 policy areas. And we can see that Canada is very strong in anti-discrimination policy area, as well as in family reunion, access to nationality, and education. Canada got the lowest point in political participation, only 50, and labor market mobility and health, the performance is fairly well, but Canada needs improvement in these 2 sectors. So before talking about the key policy areas, I would like to highlight what happened between 2014 and 2019. And if you look at the graph, we see that Canada's scores in all policy areas except for health remain the same during this period. So what does that mean? Is Canada standing still? Isn't there any room for change or need for change? So I'm going to address these questions while looking at some of the key policy areas. So anti-discrimination is Canada's strongest strength. Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms ensure equal rights to all, regardless of race, gender, class, ethnicity, and all other identities. Although Canadian history is grounded in colonization and white settler identity, over the years, Canadian policymakers, politicians, and publics have reshaped the narratives by focusing on multiculturalism and diversity. And unlike in the USA, we don't see polarized political narratives in Canada. So the liberal and the conservative political leaders, they do have slightly different policies towards immigration, but they have similar perception towards migrants and similar narratives towards migrants in Canada, and they do emphasize the how important migrants are for Canadian economy. And these positive narratives actually influence the attitude of Canadians towards migrants as well. For example, a recent study conducted by the Environics Institute found that even during the COVID, Canadians actually showed more positive attitude towards migrants, and they don't think migrants are a threat to the job market. Rather, majority of Canadians believe that migrants are good for Canadian economy. So Canada got the lowest point in political participation because in Canada, the non-citizens do not have voting rights, as well as they do not have any representation at the national policy-making bodies. However, permanent residents get citizenship fairly quickly. For example, after 3 years of residency in Canada, and also those who had lived in Canada as a temporary migrant for 1 or more years need less time. So can we see access to nationality as a mitigating policy in terms of political participation? So this is a question. However, I think that Canadian policymakers should focus on how to improve political participation of non-citizens. 3 years is still a long period, and there is a room for improvement. So I have grouped labor market mobility and health together because most of the challenges that migrants face in these two areas are almost the same. As I mentioned before, that between 2014 and 2019, Canada actually improved in the health sector. It got the point increased from 56 in 2014 to 73 in 2019, and the improvement happened because the asylum seekers from non-refugee producing countries are now included in a system of health coverage, and also they have access to information regarding health education entitlement, and their access to interpretation services. However, inclusion doesn't mean that they actually can use the service and they have access to the free healthcare, because to access healthcare in Canada, a migrant needs legal documents. For example, residency card, social insurance number, valid work or study permits, and so on. And because asylum seekers and many undocumented migrants do not have those legal documents, they actually cannot access those services. And the similar challenge or similar problems are in the employment market, because without legal documents, migrants cannot access employment. So the most affected groups in these two areas are undocumented migrants and migrants with temporary status, including asylum seekers, international students, and temporary foreign workers. So if we look at what happened in Canada between 2015 and 2019, we'll see that the facts and figures are showing that the three groups that I mentioned earlier, their numbers are actually increasing in Canada. And it increased significantly between 2015 and 2019. So these are the most vulnerable groups who actually have a lot of challenges in terms of not only accessing healthcare and employment opportunities, but also to exercise their rights, their civic rights and social rights. So it is absolutely, Canada needs more improvement, more inclusive policies focusing on the vulnerable groups, including undocumented migrants, asylum seekers, and other temporary migrants, especially low-skilled temporary migrants. And also these groups of temporary migrants take longer time to become permanent resident. Some of the groups don't even have any avenues to transition to permanent status. For example, seasonal agricultural workers and other low-skilled workers, they do not have many avenues to become permanent resident. So the length of residency as non-citizen for temporary migrant is longer than landed immigrants. Therefore, their representation in the national and policy-making bodies is also really crucial. So Maurice already reflected on the comparison between Canada and the USA. So I would like to just add that Canada received higher scores than the USA in most policy areas except for health, because in the USA, the undocumented migrants are included in the health providing system, which hasn't happened in Canada. In certain areas, the difference is not too much. For example, anti-discrimination, education, and access to nationality. However, Canada's scores are significantly higher than those in the USA in family reunion and permanent residence sector. So Canada has a specific stream, family-sponsored class to bring family members, and that help reunite families in Canada, and that is another huge strength in Canadian policies. And also Canada has been known as the land of permanent residents. So every year, on average, 350,000 migrants come to Canada as landed immigrants, and the requirement for maintaining permanent residence is not, it is quite flexible. It's 730 days in 5 years. So these are the backgrounds for Canadian strength. So when we look at the scores in different policy areas and then the comparison between Canada and the USA, we see that the MIPEX score provides us an opportunity to assess the effectiveness of the national policies, to identify strengths and weaknesses in policy areas, and compare policies among the destination countries, and create a platform for advocacy and policy reform. However, my question is, to what extent do the MIPEX scores on national policies capture the lived experiences of migrants at the local level? And I'm asking this question because Canada got 100 out of 100 in anti-discrimination. But what does that mean? Because if we look at the Canadian labour market, we see that there has been an increasing income gap between Canadian-born and immigrants, and also income disparity is much larger between different groups of migrants based on race and gender. Especially racialized women are disproportionately concentrated in precarious jobs, and they have very low income than the national average. There are also a number of restrictions for low-skilled temporary foreign workers in terms of their occupational mobility, their employment mobility, locational mobility, as well as their transition to permanent status. We also look at regional or provincial variations. For example, the policies in Quebec are quite distinct than the other parts of Canada. Recently, Quebec passed Bill 21, which prohibits migrants from public sector who would wear or bear any kind of religious symbols, and so that excludes a lot of Muslims and Sikh population from public sector. So given all these factors, I would like to say that MIPEX is a good way to understand the national policies at the national level, but it cannot capture the local complexities and local variations. However, MIPEX, of course, indeed opened the door for further debates and open the opportunities to conduct further research on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Marisha. I love a good researcher who can summarize a lot of complex stuff very quickly and effectively. And I appreciate the fact that we now have time for a very wonderful panel of 4 to reflect on these findings and on MIPEX and some of the lessons that we can apply to our practices across North America. One of the things that, let me just reintroduce very quickly, we have the benefit of having Ava Millona, one of the founders of the National the Partnership for New Americans, one of the leaders of NIC. We have Usha George, who is a great researcher and has really looked at women and oppression, those intersectional studies. We've got Kayse, Jama, who has been a fabulous leader in Oregon and has really built coalitions to address the issue of who's left out of the party and doesn't have a seat at the table. And I think we also will draw Marisha back to add her voice to our foursome. So thank you. Let me start with Usha, if you would. What are you hearing in this that helps us to think about how we can learn from each other's country? What would we want to learn, and what can we teach?
Right. Excuse me. If I could start with what I found in 2 of my studies. As Marsha explained, the policy arena is very strong. One of my first study that I'm doing right now is on the settlement, a process of Syrian refugees as they were admitted into Canada 2 years ago. They're extremely delighted to be in Canada. The safety, the security, the opportunities, future for children, everything is at the top. But when they talk about labor market integration, getting jobs that they like to do, getting into the labor market where their qualifications are accepted, that's a big challenge. They complain about the difficulties of the process, the difficulties of how their credentials that they got from Syria have been totally devalued, and not even knowing how to go forward. And just even getting general employment, even outside their own their own a professional qualification, a qualified area, it has been a challenge for them because most of the refugees did not have much of familiarity with English, and which without English, it is a very difficult thing to do. The second study.
Usha, I'm going to cut you off there because if we're going to go through our 8 questions, we're going to get a good point, and I appreciate that point. And Eva, I know you're going to be with us for only a few of the questions. So, what do you want to say about what we want to learn or teach in working with each other in North America? You don't have your mic on.
Well, somebody needs
there you
to.
Go. You're on.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation with this wonderful panel. One thing that really stands out for me is, Maurice made a great point that even though the United States experienced, 4 years of, a tremendous setback in immigration policy, the United States still remains in the top 10, and we've done pretty well in the area of accessing nationality. So once you're in the United States and you are a lawful permanent resident, you meet the requirements. Citizenship is quite accessible. So that's a lesson to be learned, that even in difficult times, we remain with a high score in accessing nationality. The other important piece is access to labor market. My colleague mentioned that Canada, being Canada and having, high scores in so many areas, a labor market, it's one area that I think United States have a lot to show and be proud of. Once you are authorized and you're in the United States as a work authorized individual, you can access the labor market. And I think that's a great lesson to share and learn. The area of discrimination, the discrimination laws, we are really very robust in many areas of, having the civil rights protected and the immigration and nationality law.
Ava, I'm going to invite Kayse to join us at this point, because I think it's incredible as we talk about discrimination laws and civil rights laws to think how different it is for people of color who are among the immigrants in both countries. Kayse, where are we and where do we need to be going to have a concept of justice that is really dealing with those who are faced with the difference of race and religion and language all at the same time?
Thank you, West. I think a couple of things, and I really appreciate this conversation. I think this is really incredible report that really allows us to be examining some of the gains that we have made for the last decades, but also the losses that we have suffered under the Trump administration. But I think for me, one of the things that really I want to highlight is that we cannot have a conversation about integration and immigration and immigrant refugee issues without really talking about race and how race intersects with everything about integrated immigrant refugees. So, United States is a country who's been founded around race, and Trump administration really brought those issues into the mainstream. He just tapped into what's already there. But in terms of the generally, he also tapped into it because of there's a public folks who are also willing to accept that kind of a narrative, white supremacy, who are also looking for economically struggling themselves, but also looking for a scapegoat. And I think what we are witnessing is that right now for the last few years in the United States is that the white supremacy is becoming a center stage in United States politics. And so that's really take away. I think the other piece is that also United States is 50 states, and it's really complex country, and really each state's own unique and different how immigrant refugees are faring. And I think that's really needs to be highlighted. So if you live in Oregon, it's different than if you live in Nashville, Tennessee, or you live in Alabama. It's really each state has its own uniqueness. But the one thing that's really in common is that since the Trump administration came to power, and even before that, the hate crimes and anti-discrimination issues that has been really permanent in our community. And the last thing that I'm going to say is that I think we have to really be making sure that if we are addressing this issue integration, again, we have to emphasize around how do we talk about race and racial issues within because each group subcategories are different than the others. So anti-immigrant sentiment, Islamophobia, those are some things that are really permanent in our society that needs to be addressed and examined by this kind of report.
Thank you so much. I think we have to come back to these themes all three of you have spoken to. I want to touch on an issue that I think is across the developed world or the northern continents. We have an incredible rise of nationalism. Usha, when you think about this rise of nationalism, it's a threat to immigrants arriving into North America in both our countries. How do we address this? I'm going to ask Eva to jump right in on top of your words too to share.
Is that me first?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the greatest things that we can observe about Canada is that the whole issue around immigration is not so polarized. There is a bit of a nationalism coming on board in 2018 or something when a political party with anti-immigrant sentiments were formed, but that party had no say, no voice in the election, so they were totally defeated. Both the conservative and the liberal governments are pro-immigration. The level to which they go is different. So nationalism in terms of Canadians only is not necessarily a big threat here. And at the same time, the public support for migration has been increasing slowly. Even at the height of this COVID, there was the environmental study that a survey that came out in October 2020 talked about increasing support for migration among Canadians on the whole, even when there is high levels of unemployment and absolutely no understanding of what the future of the economy would look like. They still thought immigration is a good thing to have simply because immigrants create jobs, they create businesses, and so they are good for the economy, and therefore there is that positive vibe about how immigrants should be accepted to come into Canada.
That's a helpful introduction to Canada. Eva, you see the same in the U.S.?
Well, the unfortunate thing, I think, in the U.S. in terms of immigration policy is that, it has been polarized to the extreme, and that's a huge threat. Given also, the 4 years of what we experienced, and immigrants and refugees being one of the groups that were hit hard, we also have the good story to tell, the survival under COVID, and how immigrants and refugees were, frontline workers and essential workers. So as we see immigration as a polarized issue, I see also an opportunity to talk about a different narrative, to tell a different story, to take this polarized and political conversation into a policy conversation and really build a narrative of inclusion.
Well, building a narrative is no small thing. Let's talk a little about the role of practitioners as opposed to researchers and policymakers. How does this translate down into the work that you do, Kayse, in organizing at your state level, or you, Eva, doing this in terms of the Massachusetts Immigrant Refugee Advocacy Coalition?
I think, first of all, the work, for example, that the National Partnership for New Americans has done has been incredible. And it really highlights how we can build a strong alliance and coalition building in our community before Trump and during the Trump administration. And I think one of the strong statements that really come out of that work for the last 4 years is also We Are All America campaign that really first 3-4 years spend a lot of energy around making sure that we push back the refugee and asylum, anti-asylum, anti-refugee issues in our country, and really push that as forefront. And now transitioning to the new administration and creating really opportunities around how do we push the inflow more further and create opportunity for immigrants and refugees. And one of the campaigns that right now we're transitioning to is a campaign that's called Opportunity for All. That's really centered around the leadership of the immigrant refugee community. And we're hoping that that will be really providing opportunity not only to work with the immigrant refugee population, but also work with the local community and create an alliance between the local communities as well as the immigrant refugees themselves, because we cannot allow to be wedged both local community and the immigrant refugee community, and we have to build that alliance.
Eva, your site, what are you doing?
What I would say is that the story and the collective power of the National Partnership for New Americans and all the coalitions across the 37 plus states, it's a story of success. If you look at the numbers of the new Americans that voted and became citizens and voted, it's 3 million people. 3 million new Americans who voted in the new election. So the power of organizing and the power of the good storytelling, I think it's powerful to bring us to a narrative of inclusion and unity.
Well, I like that. It's the most positive thing. I think along with having a promise of 125,000 refugees, things do change, and I do believe we're on the verge of a renewal.
One quick thing, if I may, is that regardless of some low points in one place and extreme policies for the last 4 years, we also, what's unique about the United States and a lesson and a story to be told is that also states, given that integration is a local issue, states really are the amazing laboratories of wonderful policies, local and state policies for inclusion and unity. And I think what happened in the last 4 years in many states, including Massachusetts and New York and Illinois and Colorado and all of that, is great models of success, of inclusion, and looking at immigrants and seeing them as part of the solution and not part of the problem.
Well, let's switch gears here, and I think Marisha, you probably are the lead voice in this one to start with, but Usha, you want to join in? Across the North American economies, we've seen the dependence on immigrants, but we really still have a significant issue of wage disparity, wage gap. What do we need to do? How do we address this?
Thanks for your question, Westy. As Usha already mentioned, then one of the big issues that migrants face when they want to get into the labor market is the non-recognition of their foreign credential and the expectation of Canadian employers that migrants should have Canadian experience. How can you get Canadian experience without having any job in the first place in Canada? So there is a disparity between the ways the foreign credentials are evaluated in the labor market and during the immigration process. So when migrants come to Canada, they get points for their work experience and education, but after coming to Canada, they realize that those don't really have much value for value in the labor market. So one of the ways it can be this issue can be addressed by, for example, having a good credential accreditation system, which Canada has a very good system in place. But lots of migrants, especially for women, to get information and access the procedure is difficult. So the settlement service organizations can actually help in terms of reaching out the vulnerable groups, women and refugees, and help them go through this process. So this is one way. And second is involvement of employers within this dialogue. So what we are seeing, even though the policymakers and the academics and researchers are talking about the wage disparity and labor market challenges for migrants, but the employers are often excluded from the dialogue. So we need to include employers more and more in this dialogue, and then take kind of pilot projects to match employers with migrants, so that the employers also have positive view about migrants' credentials.
It takes a complicated approach to get the employers and the migrants. Usha, did you want to add anything to that? A quick thought?
Yes, just to add to that, in addition to the employers understanding migrants and their qualifications and credentials and so on, the whole issue around diversity and inclusion has to be a little more widely known to the employers. For example, diversity is a strength, and it brings in a good workplace, which can be extremely productive. A lot of the employers do not know those things, so they are quickly sort of employing someone to get their jobs done. So there needs to be a little more understanding and education around public education around the importance of diversity in the workplaces, the importance of the absence of discrimination, whether it is explicit or implicit. And that's also another way to sort of counter this whole labor market inequality.
Ava, looked like you wanted to add to this.
Well, I mean, the way I was thinking about it in terms of the, labor market equality is in the United States, the immigration status, it's one big issue. But for those who, that has its own complications in terms of job protection and minimum wage and all of that. But in terms of those, who are work authorized, they can, access labor market, and diversity in many places has been seen as a plus. And employers are pretty much engaged in that conversation. And one of the successes for having businesses speak to immigration and to speak to diversity and a pro-business agenda in the United States, it's pretty much because, the employers do understand, the role of diversity and the values that adds to the labor market.
I want to shift gears here a little bit and talk about some of the things that I think we haven't touched on, but one of them is the incredible reality of Black Lives Matter. And I, as a Danish American, I haven't had to experience any of that. But when I've listened to all of the changed rhetoric of the country, and I do see really positive things happening in terms of police accountability and public movement, I'm not sure I see what's happening that is inclusive of the immigrant community. So, Kayse, you're the closest to this. What has to happen in terms of the attachment or connections for brown populations, for other Black populations that haven't been a part of the American Civil Rights Movement? I'd like to know where this is going, if it's going.
So thank you, Westy. I think the question, first of all, let's step back for a second and really understand that what I said earlier, which is around this country, again, is fundamentally a race-based country. So immigrant and refugees, particularly those immigrant refugees of color, and particularly the Black immigrants, they come when they come to this country, they experience the same issues that the Black and brown long-time residents are experiencing. So whether dealing with police brutality or whether dealing with even being excluded in the economic gains that we have made for the last decade, those are issues who are permanent within the immigrant refugee community. But I think the question that is also needs to be addressed and asked is that also, how do we immigrant refugees can also integrate and support the work around issues of Black Lives Matter or just around issues of justice and inclusion? And we have done some work around it, but there can be done more. So I think in solidarity-wise, the immigrant refugee community needs to step to the plate and really create alliance, both in terms of dealing with issues of economic issues, dealing with issues of human rights, dealing with issues of hate crimes, dealing with issues of race and racism in the United States, and really working together with the long-term, Black and brown residents to address some of those challenges. And that's where I see the opportunity really comes very crucial, that we have to build that alliance. And I think the work that we have been doing in Oregon and other folks in this room, that will allow us to really be expanding those conversations much deeper. And alliance and building is going to be a crucial piece of it, because we can be wedged. If we want to deal with those issues, we have to be strong together and build a unified movement for justice.
Does this resonate in Canada, Marisha? I know the numbers are relatively small of our Latin American brothers and sisters.
In terms of Black Lives Matter movement?
Yep.
Yes, we actually in Canada, after what happened in the USA and the emergence of like a very visible movement, the Black Lives Matter movement actually influenced Canadians as well. We have seen more discussion in the academia as well as outside of the academia. For example, in York University in Canada, the Faculty of Arts and Humanities, they actually proposed to open some positions, a few positions to address the experiences of Black communities in Canada and openly discuss about this. And there are a couple of conferences that are planning, like, that are at the planning stage right now, but they are also looking at what does it mean in terms of Canada, in terms of Canadian history, in terms of Canadian migration history, and so on. In the discipline of migration, we are also looking at more consciousness and awareness. For example, studies, for example, the population, for example, the Maghrebi population, migrant population who are coming from the northern part of Africa. They are also proposing special working group to address their issues. So yes, in Canada also, at the public level as well as in the academia and the research as well as at the policy level, people are showing much more awareness about the experiences of Black communities and the historical discrimination that the Black communities have experienced in Canada. However, I would like to add that in Canada we don't see that kind of police brutality against Black communities. It's not a common event like in the USA. So in that area, I would say that Canada is doing much better in terms of
Radically different histories, but I'm glad to hear a positive report about the differences. We have time for one last question, and I'm going to start it with Eva and then take it to Usha. We are an exciting new moment in the United States where it appears that the Electoral College has the votes that will indicate who our next president is, appointments being made by the hour. Take us into the next 4 years. What should be happening in the new administration of the United States to advance immigrant integration?
Thank you, Westy. Yes, we do have a president-elect that, will start January 20th. And, given who he is, a figure in American politics that works across the aisle, but also sharing a vision of inclusion, we see a lot of hope. I think for the United States, this is a new chapter of hope that we will, looking forward to working with President-elect Biden to really come at a point that we have a national integration policy at the federal level. There were attempts under the Obama administration. There was, a memorandum that established a task force, established a policy of inclusion and, critical leadership in developing that coordination between state and national. But our hope is that in the new era of the new president, America will enter really at a phase of formulating a national integration policy, possibly creating the Office of Unity or Inclusion that will bring all people together and will tell the good story that immigrants are part of the solution. So that's our hope, that we will have an integration policy. We will have practices and regulations reversed from the previous administration. And really, getting to the next MIPEX, the hope is that the United States will have higher score in so many areas as well, and hopefully make it from the top 10 to the top 4.
Well, I'm sure from your lips to the Biden ears, and NPNA working hard on it, there's a possibility of a unity strategy for the United States. So I'm cheering on that vision. Usha, what's changing in Canada on this issue, and what's it look like going forward? You've got some years before Trudeau's voted on it.
We have the same government, which of course welcomes immigration. So I think the biggest policy challenge for or even the practice challenge for the government is to actually recognize some of the migrants who are in Canada and who do not have legal status, who proved to be extremely essential for the work they needed to do during the COVID times. So in fact, the recognition has been slowly coming in. Some temporary foreign workers who actually worked in the health sector are promised permanent status. Definitely that's a welcome change. And we are excited about it. At the same time, there are many, many temporary foreign workers and undocumented migrants who have become essential workers and who do permanent work, even though they are seen as unskilled and not essential. So these workers hopefully will have a chance at permanent residency. of course, even the numbers that are being admitted right now or even given right now is only 1,000 or so in the whole country. But we are hoping that there is enough goodwill to recognize the contributions of these individuals to the economy, particularly at a time when COVID struck and we were about to be paralyzed in terms of healthcare workers, other essential workers, food processors, construction workers, and so on and so forth. So I hope that that would be a welcome change. Otherwise, Canada has a very structured immigration policy, but it has to actually right now look at what are we lacking, how this is the perfect moment for Canadian values to actually come together with our own economic interests. Sometimes we feel that the two are going in sideways. They are not necessarily meeting. They are going parallel directions. But I think this is an opportunity for us to kind of come together where our values of human rights and equality and diversity and all of that would come together to offer and enable these marginalized communities to become permanent residents.
Well, MIPEX has allowed us to look at 52 countries and to hold up each other's examples of good practice and good policy. And we have only had moments to touch on a handful of the hot and pressing issues. But I hope that we've made the point that the world changes with good policy, and with bad policy, we are often sunk. So we need to know which policies it is that are important, which ones to advance, and which ones make a big difference. We barely talked about how much better the Canadian patterns of citizenship are and how we could learn so quickly just by considering a significant change, like going from 5 years to 3 years for eligibility, or multiple languages as part of the eligibility. There's so many things that one country has to teach the other. And I am very grateful, Marisha and Usha, for your voice from Canada to be with us today. Kayse, great national leader and transatlantic dialogue participant, helping us to really think globally and act locally. Ava leading us in this conference and in so many other ways to have an immigration strategy that is focused on integration. We are very, very fortunate. And I look forward to more from you, as we also had good contributions from Maurice today. I'm going to leave this in the last words with Thomas. I have to tell the story that I was teaching a course on immigrant integration in Europe, and I looked very hard at the fact what kind of material would be helpful and who should I visit with. And I was so excited to discover Thomas's work and the work of MIPEX, because I had never seen anyone structurally analyze immigrant integration with all the components, all the levers of power, all the ways policy could throw this into high gear or slow it down. And Thomas's work really, for me, was a profound encounter with a systemic and structured way to understand immigrant integration. And it's been at the heart of my teaching. And I hope it's at the heart of some of you now, as you think about the fact that we have been too shallow and too simple in settling for the fact that a citizenship program or a language program is the only thing that we ought to be working on. We have so much to do, and do it together. Thomas, last word.
Well, thank you so much, Westy, for giving this last word. I mean, I've been living in Europe for 15 years, connecting people globally. I'm originally from Massachusetts, and
a homeboy.
I just wanted to say that, I think that the North American approach has meant that people are very aware of discrimination, and that we see also in the evidence. They are aware of their rights, they're fighting up for their rights, and there are allies who stand up for their rights and for their participation. And that has meant that still there are a positive general attitude towards immigrants that remains resilient in these places. And so we should be very thankful for that approach. We also should admit that there are things that both Canada and the United States do not do very well. There are a lot of things that they don't think about because they don't look more broadly. If you don't become a citizen, you're not really part of the discussion in public life. There are major gaps in how the US and Canada deal with health, deal with labor market, and that means that immigrants do end up overqualified for their jobs and with poor health outcomes. But there are also some positive things that I think that the US in particular can learn from Canada, where you do see such high levels of citizenship acquisition, of voter participation in Canada. and of a stronger sense of belonging. And I hope that also American cities and states can learn from Canadian cities and provinces and European cities and regions that are doing so much more with so much more ambitious integration policies. So I do hope that this is an invitation for you to use MIPEX, the Transatlantic Migrant Democracy Dialogue, other tools that allow you to connect with leaders working in very different contexts and learn from them.
You've given us a tool. Now it's up to us to decide what to do with it. To all of you who've joined us, you can get more information by going to www.mipex.eu/key findings and be able to learn more about MIPEX. That's mipex.eu/key findings, one word. And I also encourage you to look at other devices like My City and to take a look at some of the ways you can assess your community and see where the gaps are so that we are thinking very strategically about where to make our investments over the next couple of years. There may be at least more positive political environments in which to work, but the work still comes down to the local level where we have to be the champions to be sure that everyone has a seat at the table, that neither race nor language have excluded people from the participatory roles that are necessary for our democracy, or excluded them from the economic opportunities that are great for them and for their families. Working together, we do have a very different world. Thank you very much for joining us at our MIPEX 2020 international launch. And to be a part of NIC is a great privilege and honor for all of us. All the best to you. Bye.
We thank you for being part of our first ever virtual NIC Summit. We hope you have enjoyed and been inspired by your 2 days with us, and we look forward to seeing you again in person at NIC 2021 in Las Vegas, Nevada. Thank you to our 16 national and regional partners and members of the NIC Leadership Committee and more than 20 steering committee members that helped develop this year's program and the many sponsors that made this year's NIC possible. We look forward to the work ahead and to continue to collaborate with each of you as we are guided toward our common purpose. This concludes our 13th annual National Immigrant Integration Conference, and our work together in 2021 will be even more important as we welcome a new chapter of immigrant inclusion and equity in our nation.
Happy New Year! Happy New Year!
Happy New Year! Good night.